Life felt like a never-ending night, black and suffocating, as if every door of hope had been bolted shut. The narrator, a simple man with nothing but love for his two children, had carried dreams bigger than his own strength. He had sold everything he could, furniture, household items, even the jewelry his wife reluctantly parted with, just to gather enough to travel abroad. He believed that in Saudi Arabia he would find opportunities that would allow him to give his children the life they deserved. His daughter's eyes sparkled every time she saw a doll in the market, and his son often spoke of toys and books he longed to hold. Those innocent desires haunted him each night, urging him to take risks that others in his place would fear. The journey, however, did not unfold the way he had pictured it. The promise of a brighter future crumbled almost immediately upon his arrival. In a foreign land where he barely spoke the language, he discovered that trust can vanish as quickly as sand slipping between fingers. The very friend who had arranged his trip, who had assured him of support and guidance, now refused to recognize him. The man acted as though no relationship had ever existed between them. The betrayal cut deep, leaving him stranded and without direction. Worse still, his savings disappeared, stolen before he could even grasp the danger he had walked into. The little bundle of money his wife had handed him, earned through sacrifice and tears, was gone. Without cash, without contacts, and without his passport, which had been snatched away in circumstances he could hardly explain, he was left to wander the unfamiliar streets. The city was bustling with expensive cars, tall buildings, and luxurious villas, but for him it was nothing more than a labyrinth of loneliness. He could not even call home. He feared that if he managed to hear his wife's voice, he would break down, unable to tell her that everything had collapsed. His mother had dreamed of visiting one day to perform her sacred pilgrimage, but how could he even think of such a promise now when survival itself was in question? Every night he sat on the side of the road watching people pass by, wishing that one face among them might stop and offer a word of kindness. He had heard stories that Arabs were generous, that they often helped strangers and foreigners, but his experience so far had been cold and harsh. The few men he approached looked at him with impatience or irritation, their curt responses in Arabic leaving him even more confused. Slowly, fear took the place of hope. He began to believe that perhaps fate itself had decided to punish him for daring to dream beyond his means. It was in this moment of despair, sitting quietly by the roadside, that his destiny was about to take a turn he never could have imagined. The night air grew heavier as he sat silently by the roadside, his thoughts consumed by regret and helplessness. Suddenly, the glare of headlights pierced through the darkness. A black car slowed down and came to a halt just a few feet from where he sat. The sleek vehicle stood out against the emptiness of the street, its tinted windows reflecting the dim lights from nearby buildings. His heart skipped a beat. In that moment, instinct whispered that nothing good could come from strangers stopping in a place like this. The driver's door opened, and a tall man stepped out. His face was hidden behind a mask, his attire neat yet intimidating. Without saying a word, the stranger stared at him, as if examining every detail of his worn-out face. Before the narrator could gather his thoughts, the masked man called out to someone still inside the car. The reply came in rapid Arabic, sharp, commanding words he could not understand. Anxiety tightened his chest. His mind screamed at him to run, but his body refused to move. He felt as though he had been caught in a trap designed long before this night. When the masked man motioned for him to get inside the car, fear surged through him. He shook his head in protest and tried to step back, but the man's hand shot forward, gripping his arm with frightening strength. His resistance was useless. He was dragged toward the vehicle and shoved into the back seat. Inside, two more men sat waiting. Their tall, broad frames dwarfed his smaller build, their eyes filled with an authority that silenced any thought of escape. As the car sped off into the unknown, the men inside began to argue among themselves. Their words, harsh and clipped in Arabic, echoed like weapons clashing in the dark. Gestures grew wild, their voices rising until it seemed they might erupt into violence at any moment. The narrator sat frozen, his palms sweating, his gaze darting between their faces. He imagined them turning their rage toward him, ending his life without hesitation. Every second inside that car felt like a battle against time, a silent prayer for mercy. The ride seemed endless. Each turn of the road dragged him deeper into uncertainty until finally the vehicle slowed and came to a stop. The place was deserted, silent except for the hum of the engine. Ordered out of the car, he obeyed, trembling. As he stood in front of them, one of the men hurled a heavy bag at his feet. He looked down at it, confusion and dread battling within him. He had no idea that inside that bag lay something that would not only shake his world, but also pull him into a dangerous game from which escape would not be simple. The deserted ground was eerily quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos inside the car only moments before. The narrator's heart pounded as his eyes rested on the bag thrown before him. It looked ordinary from the outside, dark, worn, and unremarkable, but something about the way it had been dropped, almost ceremoniously, made it feel heavier than stone. One of the men gestured sharply, instructing him to pick it up. His hands trembled as he bent down, his breath caught somewhere between his chest and throat. When he pulled open the zipper, his vision blurred for a moment, refusing to believe what lay inside. Bundles upon bundles of US dollars stared back at him, neatly stacked, filling every corner of the bag. He had seen money before, but never in such a vast, almost surreal amount. For a man who had struggled even to pay school fees or buy a doll for his daughter, the sight was overwhelming. His fingers brushed against the crisp paper, and he quickly shut the bag, afraid that just looking too long might summon disaster. Before he could utter a word, the tallest man, the one who seemed to lead the group, stepped forward. To his shock, the man spoke in broken Urdu, his accent oddly familiar, almost like someone from back home. "From today, this money belongs to you," he declared, his tone commanding. The narrator froze, unable to process the sudden shift. The stranger's eyes hardened as he continued, "Do not ask questions. Never try to see our faces. If you make the mistake of interfering, we will ensure your life turns into begging on the streets of Africa." The threat was like ice sliding down his spine, fear mixed with confusion, creating a storm in his chest. Why would these men give him such wealth? What did they want in return? Yet no answers were offered, only silence after the warning. And then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, the car sped away, leaving him alone with the bag in the middle of nowhere. His legs felt weak, but he forced himself to move. Clutching the bag tightly to his chest, he began walking toward the faint glow of a nearby settlement. His mind spun with questions he could not silence. Was this money cursed? Was he now entangled in a smuggling ring? Or was he chosen for something far darker? He reminded himself that nobody gives such fortune without a reason. But at that moment, hunger and despair silenced his doubts. All he knew was that this bag could change everything for his family. Yet with every step he took, he felt invisible eyes watching him from the shadows, as though someone or something was making sure he carried the burden exactly as they intended. The weight of the bag pressed against his chest as he walked back toward the bustling streets. Each step felt unreal, as though he were drifting between two lives, the one he had known, poor and helpless, and this new, terrifying life where he carried enough wealth to last generations. The neon lights of small shops soon appeared, and with them the sound of people. He tried to blend in, clutching the bag tightly, heart racing whenever anyone's gaze lingered too long. By the time he reached the market, his throat was dry, his stomach aching from hunger. He decided to test a portion of what he had been given. He slipped a few bundles into his pocket, exchanged them at a currency shop, and walked away with Saudi riyals in his hands. The clerk hadn't even raised an eyebrow. It seemed normal. That small transaction alone gave him enough money to buy food, clothes, and gifts for his children. For the first time in weeks, he ate until his hunger subsided. The fear was still there, but it was buried beneath the relief of finally tasting a meal he hadn't begged for. The following days blurred into a haze of spending. He bought toys for his son, a beautiful doll for his daughter, and jewelry for his wife. He even arranged for items to be shipped back home, imagining their joy when they received the packages. When his wife finally heard his voice over the phone, she scolded him for not calling sooner. He tried to reassure her with a lie, that an elderly Arab woman had taken pity on him and offered help. She seemed satisfied, though still puzzled by how quickly fortune had turned in his favor. But deep inside, he knew the lie was dangerous. He had created a story without realizing that destiny was waiting to make it real. One evening, as he rested in his modest hotel room, his phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. At first, he ignored it, but when it rang again and again, he reluctantly answered. The voice on the other end was smooth, carrying a Pakistani accent that immediately unsettled him. "You don't need to be afraid," the caller said warmly. "You are valuable to us. You are not in danger, not yet." but soon we will need something from you." The words made his stomach twist. He asked who they were, what they wanted, but the only answer was a cryptic reassurance. "Everything will be clear when the time comes. For now, enjoy the money." As the call ended, his earlier relief dissolved into unease. That bag of dollars was no blessing. It was a trap, an invitation into a game he didn't understand, where the rules had already been written and his role had been chosen for him. The hotel room was quiet except for the hum of the air conditioner, yet he couldn't escape the echo of that unsettling voice. Its calm tone carried more threat than comfort, as if danger was hidden between every word. He lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, the bag of money locked away in the wardrobe, but instead of peace, unease clawed at his chest. Wealth had come suddenly, yet it brought with it a constant shadow. He realized he had traded hunger for paranoia, and neither gave him rest. The next day, as he tried to walk through the market with a forced smile, the phone rang again. He froze, staring at the screen. The same unknown number. Against his better judgment, he answered. This time the voice was sharper, less friendly. "You spent $1,000 already. Do you think we don't know?" His throat tightened. The caller chuckled coldly, then continued, "That money wasn't charity." It was a key. And keys open doors, don't they? He tried to protest, insisting he wanted nothing to do with them, that they should take it all back. But the reply was swift and merciless. "Too late. You've used what was ours. That makes you part of this now. Tomorrow, go to the place where we first met. If you fail, you'll regret it more than you can imagine." Then the line went dead. Panic spread through him like fire. He paced the room, his mind swarming with questions he couldn't answer. Who were these people? Mafia? Smugglers? Why him? Why plant such wealth in the hands of a desperate father? He even considered abandoning everything, leaving the bag behind and trying to disappear back to Pakistan. But then he thought of his wife and children. The mysterious men had mentioned his family before. What if they were already being watched? What if harm came to them because of his defiance? Sleep eluded him that night. Whenever his eyes closed, he imagined faceless men standing outside his home, frightening his wife, staring at his children with cold, unblinking eyes. By morning, exhaustion forced him to accept what he dreaded. He would have to go, he would have to face them, no matter the cost. When the sun dipped low and shadows stretched across the streets, he made his way back to that same deserted stretch where the black car had stopped days earlier. His palms were sweaty, his knees weak. The silence was heavier this time, broken only by the sound of his own shallow breathing. Then once again, a car appeared, black, gleaming, and menacing. The door opened, but this time, it was not a masked man who stepped out. It was an elderly woman, her face lined with years, her eyes glistening with emotions he could not understand. She reached out to him as if he were someone she had long been waiting for. The moment felt unreal. He had braced himself for masked men, harsh voices, perhaps even violence. Instead, standing before him was a frail old woman, wrapped in an elegant black cloak. Her face partially veiled, but her trembling hands stretched toward him with desperate affection. Before he could react, she pulled him into a sudden embrace. Her tears wet his shoulder as she whispered words in Arabic he could not understand. For a brief second, fear loosened its grip, replaced by confusion. Why was this stranger holding him as though he were her long-lost child? Behind her, armed guards stood silently, their expressions unreadable. When he looked at them for an explanation, one of them placed a finger to his lips, warning him to stay silent. The woman cupped his face with wrinkled hands, gazing at him through watery eyes, and then gently patted his cheek as though reassuring herself that he was real. Before he could ask a single question, she motioned for him to follow her. The guards escorted him into the waiting car, and soon they were driving toward the heart of the city. What awaited him was unlike anything he had seen in his life. A massive mansion, glowing under golden lights, rose before them like a palace. The gates opened smoothly, and dozens of servants rushed forward, bowing as the elderly woman stepped inside. The narrator followed, half in awe, half in dread. The marble floors, chandeliers, and vast hallways spoke of unimaginable wealth. He had only seen such grandeur in films, and now he was walking through it as though he belonged there. The woman gestured for him to sit while servants hurried to prepare food, but the guards remained close, their presence reminding him of his helplessness. When he hesitated, one of them leaned close and whispered in broken English, "Act like you remember nothing." "You are her son. Do not forget his blood ran cold. Now the pieces began to fit. This wasn't generosity nor coincidence. He was being used. But for what? He wanted to protest, to demand answers, yet the sharp look in the guard's eyes silenced him. He lowered himself into the chair, his body tense, while the woman sat across from him with a soft smile, still murmuring words of affection. Later, when the guards escorted him to a lavish bedroom, the truth hit harder. This was no rescue, no blessing. He was trapped in a carefully constructed lie, forced into a role he had never chosen. And though the food was plentiful, the room comfortable, and the money abundant, he realized he had stepped into a cage far more dangerous than poverty itself. The following days passed in a blur of rehearsed conversations and forced gestures. Every morning, the old woman would call for him, her frail voice filled with tenderness, her eyes glowing with the belief that she had finally been reunited with her missing son. She showed him photographs of a boy growing up in that very house, birthday celebrations, family gatherings, childhood trips. To his shock, the boy in the pictures bore a striking resemblance to him. Not identical, but close enough that someone blinded by grief could easily mistake him for her child. Each time she placed a photo in his hands, tears would pool in her eyes, and she would whisper stories of the past in Arabic. He would nod silently, pretending to understand, while guilt ate away at him. The guards, however, were not as gentle. They watched his every move, correcting him if he forgot to act confused or slipped into his natural mannerisms. One night, after escorting him back to his room, one of them finally revealed part of the truth. "Her nephew controls everything," the guard said in hushed tones. "He wants her wealth. Her real son is gone, maybe dead, maybe hidden. You look like him. That is why you are here. Play the role, make her sign the papers, and your future is secured." The words chilled him. The pieces of the puzzle began falling into place. The bag of dollars, the mysterious phone calls, the sudden embrace of the grieving woman. It was all a staged performance. He was nothing more than a pawn in a game designed by greedy relatives. The nephew had set the trap with ruthless precision, using his likeness to trick the old woman into surrendering her fortune. At night, he stared at the ceiling, torn between fear and pity. The woman had begun treating him with such love that it felt cruel to deceive her. She would sit by his side, stroke his hair, and tell him bedtime stories as if he were still her little boy. Sometimes, she would fall asleep in a chair beside his bed, clutching his hand. In those moments, he felt a surge of genuine affection for her, as though she truly were his mother. But then he remembered the guard's warnings, the threats against his family, and the icy voice on the phone. He was trapped between two impossible choices: betray a grieving woman who trusted him with her entire heart, or risk the wrath of powerful men who could destroy him and everyone he loved. Each day, the pressure grew heavier, the line between truth and lies thinning until he no longer recognized himself. He was a father, a husband, a son. But now he was also an imposter, living someone else's life, carrying a secret that could shatter everything if revealed. The mansion felt like a golden cage. Though every corner gleamed with wealth, he carried the weight of constant fear. The old woman's love grew stronger with each passing day. She would tell him stories of her son's childhood, laugh at memories, and sometimes cry while holding his hand. Her frailty and innocence tore at his conscience. He wanted to scream the truth, that he was not her son, that he had been forced into this charade, but the presence of the guards was an iron lock on his lips. One afternoon, while walking through the vast corridors, he heard a soft voice behind him. He turned and saw her, a young woman with striking beauty, her eyes sharp and questioning. She introduced herself in halting English, and he quickly realized she was the fiancée of the real son. Unlike the old woman, her gaze did not carry love, it carried suspicion. She studied his face with unease, as if she sensed something was wrong. For a fleeting moment, he felt exposed, as though she could see through the carefully woven lie. Before the conversation could go further, one of the guards appeared and interrupted. In harsh Arabic, the guard barked at the young woman, then seized his arm and pulled him away. Once they were out of earshot, the guard leaned close, his tone filled with menace. "Stay away from her. She is clever, dangerous. If she begins to doubt, everything will collapse." The warning was clear. Any connection with her could unravel the plan, and he would pay the price. From that day on, the mansion felt colder. He avoided the young woman's path, but her silent stares haunted him. He often caught her watching him from across the courtyard or the dining hall, her expression unreadable. Did she see the cracks in his performance? Did she already know he wasn't who he pretended to be? Meanwhile, the old woman's nephew began making more appearances. His presence was suffocating, his smile thin and insincere. The nephew always spoke in low tones with the guards, but once the narrator overheard enough to understand. They were planning to have the woman sign property documents. He was the key, the replacement son meant to guide her trembling hand across papers she believed to be harmless. Each night, as he lay in the luxurious room, guilt gnawed at him. The old woman's kindness contrasted sharply with the nephew's greed. The young woman's suspicion lingered like a shadow in every hallway. He was surrounded, caught between truth and deceit, affection and betrayal. Deep down, he knew the time was approaching when he would be forced to choose between saving himself or protecting the woman who had unknowingly placed her fragile heart in his hands. The pressure mounted like a storm cloud ready to burst. The old woman's nephew had grown impatient. One evening, he called the narrator into a dimly lit study, its shelves lined with expensive books and its desk covered in documents. With a forced smile, the nephew placed a stack of papers before him. "Soon," he said, tapping the folder with a ringed finger, "she will sign these. You will guide her hand. Make sure she does not hesitate. Once it is done, your part in this is finished." His words were calm, but his eyes carried an unmistakable threat. That night, the narrator could no longer silence his conscience. He thought of his children, of the values his mother had instilled in him, lessons about honesty, about the difference between right and wrong. Was he truly going to betray a grieving woman for wealth that would only corrode his soul? The young woman's watchful gaze returned to him in memory, her suspicion like a mirror, reflecting the truth he was trying so hard to bury. The following day, when the old woman sat at the grand dining table, the nephew slid the documents in front of her. She smiled, believing them to be harmless property papers. Her hand trembled as she reached for the pen. The narrator stood by her side, his heart thundering in his chest. The guards loomed nearby, eyes narrowed, ready to pounce if he deviated from the script. In that moment, he made his choice. Gently, he placed his hand over hers and whispered in English, "Do not sign. They are deceiving you." The old woman froze, confusion clouding her eyes. The young woman, seated across the table, leaned forward with sudden intensity. He turned to her and spoke quickly, exposing everything he had learned, the nephew's plan, the staged kidnapping, the reason he had been forced to act like a son who was never truly lost. For a heartbeat, silence blanketed the room, heavy and suffocating. Then chaos erupted. The old woman gasped, her face pale with shock. The young woman rushed to her side, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. The nephew's mask of civility shattered. He lunged forward, shouting in Arabic, his voice dripping with rage. But before he could seize control, the narrator pulled out his phone and pressed play. The room filled with the recording of the guard's confession, evidence of the plot. The sound of those damning words cut through the air like a blade. The old woman's trembling hand reached for the phone. She listened, tears rolling down her cheeks. Her trust had been shattered, but she had no time to mourn it. With newfound strength, she ordered the young woman to call the police. Within hours, Saudi officers stormed the mansion, their presence scattering the nephew's loyal guards. The conspirators were dragged away in handcuffs, their cries of protest echoing through the marble halls. For the first time since he had arrived in that foreign land, the narrator felt the weight on his chest lift. He had chosen truth over betrayal, and though the consequences were uncertain, he knew he had finally done the right thing. The mansion that once felt like a gilded prison was now filled with a different kind of silence. The guards who had shadowed him day and night were gone, replaced by the steady presence of police officers who cataloged evidence and secured the property. The nephew and his men had been taken away, their voices silenced by justice. For the narrator, the weight of fear that had haunted him since the night he first received the mysterious bag had finally begun to ease. The old woman, still trembling from the betrayal, reached for his hand. Though her eyes were red from tears, they shone with gratitude. She spoke slowly in broken English, enough for him to understand. "You saved me, my family, my honor." The words pierced his heart. He had come to Saudi Arabia as a desperate man, chasing survival, yet somehow he had become the unlikely protector of someone else's dignity. For the first time in months, he felt a sense of purpose that was not tied to money or fear. Later that evening, the young woman, the true son's fiancée, approached him privately. Her suspicion had transformed into respect. "You could have betrayed her," she said firmly, "but you chose not to. You risked everything." He lowered his gaze, ashamed of how close he had come to playing along with the nephew's scheme. "I only did what was right," he replied, though deep inside he knew it had taken all his strength to resist the temptation of easy wealth. The following day, the old woman called him into her private chamber. In her hands, she held a small box. Inside lay jewelry of immense value and a bundle of cash. She pressed it into his hands, insisting it was not payment for deceit, but gratitude for protection. At first, he hesitated, fearing to repeat the mistakes that had drawn him into this nightmare. But when she explained that these gifts were clean, free of manipulation, he accepted them with humility. Weeks later, with legal clearance and his passport restored, he returned to Pakistan. The sight of his wife and children waiting for him at the airport brought tears he could not hold back. He knelt, hugging his son and daughter, promising silently that their struggles had ended. With the woman's gift as seed money, he started a small business. Unlike the cursed bag of dollars, this wealth was pure, earned through trust and hard work. In time, his business flourished. He was no longer the desperate man who had wandered hungry in foreign streets. He was a father who could finally give his children the life he had dreamed of, through honesty, perseverance, and courage. The memory of that dangerous journey remained with him, not as a scar, but as a reminder. True redemption comes not from fortune gained in shadows, but from choices made in the light.